What do you get when you take a weapon like a sword and try to cross it with a tool like an axe? Hey folks, Matt Easton here, Schola Gladiatoria and Easton Antique Arms. Now, I've got here a sword. It's a 1796 light cavalry sabre, but it doesn't really matter what kind of sword it is. Over the years, many people have asked me, and if we're looking at movies and TV shows and things like that as well, the issue of a sword being used as a tool comes up. Now, funnily enough, this actually came up in one of the videos I made, in fact, a couple of videos I made, talking about Viking era axes. And a lot of people asserted, well, the great advantage of the axe is that it's a tool and a weapon. And this is this is not necessarily untrue, but it partly comes from a misunderstanding of what those Viking Age axes are like. Now, admittedly, there are some Viking era axes which actually can be used as tools and are more similar to tool axes. But that type of large Dane axe, as I've mentioned in many previous videos, is really a specific weapon. It's nothing like a wood chopping axe. The blade is too thin and fragile for chopping down trees with. You could possibly use it as a carpentry axe, and that's about at the most. So fundamentally, there's a big difference very often between a given object that is made as a tool and a given object that's made as a weapon. So coming back to swords, that means that if you take a sword like this sabre here, or you could take most other swords from history, and you try to use this as some kind of wood chopping tool or bush clearing tool, then it would work, but it wouldn't necessarily be very durable. So it's not to say that you couldn't chop down a tree with a sword. It would take quite a lot of time, and your sword might break halfway through. It's really that they're not designed for this job. Yes, it's an edged implement. Now, there's an obvious example we come to now with a machete. So a lot of people go, well, isn't a machete basically like a sword? Yes, it is kind of like a sword, but very clearly a machete is designed as a tool, not as a weapon. Now, the fact that lots of ne'er-do-wells in certain parts of the world use machetes for hacking at other humans is by the by. The most commonly used and most lethal weapon in the United Kingdom is the humble kitchen knife. Okay, kitchen knives absolutely are the predominant weapon in the UK and probably in most of the world. In certain other parts of the world, the machete, which is something for chopping, bushes down with, something that I use in the garden as a garden tool, is a predominantly used weapon. So very clearly, the line between what is a weapon and what is a tool often comes down to just how is it used, okay? But it's very clear to say that a sword like this sabre is designed primarily as a weapon, and actually a specific type of weapon. This is a cavalry sabre, and this is very different to an infantry officer's sabre, for example, or very different to a dueling rapier. It's a specific type of weapon for a specific purpose. So yes, you can use it for a tool, but it's not very well adapted to it. However, there are certain other weapons, like this belt axe, tomahawk, whatever you want to call it, that can clearly be used as either and were actually intended to be used as either. So these trade axes, which went to the Americas in the 17 and 1800s, these were literally, in a shop, this wouldn't be labelled in the tool section or the weapon section. This is just this is the axe section. This is the tomahawk section. Everybody knows that this can be used for chopping up some of your firewood. It can be thrown at someone, or it can be used in your hand as a hand weapon, or whatever. It might be used for defense against a bear. It's just an axe. So there are some things which are, yes, absolutely they are meant to be weapons and not meant to be tools. There are some things which are definitely meant to be tools, like, a hammer or a kitchen knife, but that could be used as a weapon. And there are some things which are clearly intended from the outset to be both a weapon and a tool and anything else you want them to be. So this third category is actually really, really interesting, and I think often gets overlooked. I think everybody knows that sometimes things get used as weapons that weren't intended as weapons. A chair, a walking stick, a fist. These things are not necessarily designed as weapons, but can be used as weapons. But there are definitely some things which are designed to be used for weapons and tools. And this is a really interesting category that I think almost deserves its own name, and I don't really know if it's got a name. Can you think of a name for it? I can't think of a name for it off the top of my head anyway. But there are actually quite a few things in this category, and the first thing that most people think of would be these types of axes, things like tomahawks that really can fulfill any category, or indeed something like a Bowie knife, for example. A Bowie knife is really primarily a bushman's tool. It's a hunting implement. It's something for, you know, cutting some kindling perhaps to make a fire, or it's a fighting weapon, and it can be any of those things. And yes, some Bowie knives are more weapons and some Bowie knives are more bushcraft knives, but the majority are absolutely both. So knives and tomahawks, this kind of frontiersman period, these types of multi-purpose thing were very popular. And it wasn't only the European and American sphere, it also went beyond that. So we're going to look at a couple of things here which actually fulfill both criteria. So the first example, which I usually describe on this channel as a weapon, because of course we're a military history and arms and armour channel, so that's what I focus on, is the kukri. Apologies for the rust you can see on the blade. This is on my workbench at the moment with a bunch of other things awaiting cleaning up to be put up for sale. So this is a fairly typical circa 1900, so end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, Nepalese kukri. Now, most people watching this channel will instantly think of the kukri as the weapon and sidearm of the Gurkhas, and therefore it's been used in the trenches of World War I. It's been used on the northwest frontier against Afghans. It's been used in World War II against the Japanese, charging machine gun nests and all this kind of stuff. And yes, it has been used for all of those things, but it's also a tool. And in like statistically much more impressive terms, in terms of the amount of time that this has actually been used in hand for a thing, this has predominantly been used as a tool for cutting through bush, much like a machete, cutting smaller bits of wood. You can chop down, I have actually chopped down a tree with a kukri, you can absolutely do it. It's easier with an axe, but you can do it with a kukri if that's what's on your belt. So chopping wood as a hunting implement, as a self-defense implement. We know this was used on tiger hunts, for example, and hunting all other types of big game in India and Nepal and beyond. So absolutely, hunting implement, bushcraft implement, even eating implement for preparing fish and all sorts of other stuff, and of course also a fighting weapon. So the kukri is kind of, to a Nepalese hillsman, is everything. It's all of those things. And there are different types of kukri. There are some kukri which are more what are sometimes termed villagers' kukri, and there are kukris which are more soldiers' kukri or kind of gentleman's kukri. There are fancy ones, decorated ones, which we've seen on this channel before. So there's all different types. Some kukri are more for fighting, some kukri are more for cookery, and some are more for hunting and kind of outdoors type stuff. And here I've got an example of one probably dating to the first part of the 20th century. It's actually got this is a fancy one, it's got a jade handle, it's got plated, nickel plated crossguard on it. So this is almost certainly made for a British officer. So it's kind of Anglo-Indian hunting knife style crossguard with a back piece that goes all around with a thing for a lanyard. And you'll notice that the blade is specially designed to make it better for thrusting with a long false edge. And it's quite a big blade as well. So this really, you could say it's a fighting kukri, but it's also kind of a fancy kukri. This is also off my workbench, as you can see, awaiting some cleaning up and restoration. And I've also got the scabbard for this, and the scabbards also tell a story, the fact of how this has got a fancy kind of band around with a ring, which is designed to be worn in a certain way that is not something that a villager would wear. So this is what I would term a gentleman's kukri, a traveller, an explorer, someone just showing off, or perhaps an officer. Okay. Now, interestingly, this relates to a type of kukri that was actually purchased by Sir Rudyard Kipling. Okay, and he mentions in World War I context, he mentions to his family that while he's bought a kukri, he fully expects to use it more for chopping wood than for killing the Hun. Okay, so while he's going to the trenches of the Western Front, he isn't, you know, and lots of people carried trench knives, trench daggers, knuckle dusters, all of these sorts of specialised weapons for fighting in trenches. He was quite realistic about the fact that he expected to use, and it was from a very expensive and fancy company, so it would have been a lot more fancy than this. he would have spent a lot of money on that kukri, and it was made as a weapon, but it was also made as an outdoorsman knife. Right, so final example I'm going to give, and this is a completely different one again. I have actually shown one of these on the channel previously, but I happen to have acquired another one. It is this. Now, this happens to be a mid-19th century Austrian pioneer's sidearm, but I could be showing the French briquette, or the Gladius model, or the British 1879 Pioneers Martini Henry bayonet with a sawback on it, which I've shown before. There are various types of them, and they're loosely termed as pioneers sidearms. Okay, they're usually carried within a British Army context by people in the in the Royal Engineers. Okay, so the Royal Engineers, sappers, and pioneers. So generally speaking, these are people who are operating or making entrenchments, gun emplacements, this type of fortifications, this type of thing. So they might be clearing paths, they might be putting places in for guns or defences, this kind of stuff. So they need to clear areas, clear woods and brush, they need to chop things down, and so. But they also need to have a sidearm, because bear in mind that these sidearms came around in the 18th century originally. And so this was in the age of muzzle loading guns and a very slow rate of fire, 3 rounds, perhaps 4 rounds a minute. So you need, bayonets, cutlasses, hangers, sabres, sidearms, bowie knives of all types were still really important. So what they did was they designed things like this. So this is, of all of the pioneer swords, this, and there's a Russian one as well, are 2 of the brutish, most outlandish ones out there, which is why I always enjoy showing them on the channel when I can. So one of the peculiarities of the Austrians, this is just a design feature, is that they liked a type of blade which had a fillet on one side but was flat on the other, so it's asymmetrical in cross section. Very interesting Austrian design choice. But if you just look at the general shape of this thing, it might look to you a little bit like a Messer, like a Langmesser, and it does, like that if you're looking at it. But owning several Langmesser and having handled lots of original 16th century and a couple of 15th century examples, this is a completely different thing. The blade is crazy thick. Can you see how thick that blade is? And all the way down, it has got distal taper, but not very much. This thing is an absolute beast. And yes, and it's been very well sharpened as well. Yes, absolutely, you could fight with this. But in all honesty, trying to fight with this against someone with a much more nimble weapon, even though this has got shorter reach, I'd rather have the kukri. This is not a good fighting weapon. It handles a bit like a hammer. I mean, it's far more sluggish than the tomahawk here. I'd rather have the tomahawk as a fighting weapon. So yeah, I wouldn't want to be hit by it. I mean, it clearly can be used as a weapon, but it's also clearly designed for doing axe-like tasks. It is a sword. Yes, legally, it's a sword. Visually, it's a sword. In your hand, it's an axe. It absolutely doesn't really feel like other swords. I would happily chop down a tree with this. It is like a machete on ultra steroids. It's absolutely mental, crazy thing. One thing I don't really understand is why they gave it such a long grip, and I can only think that's to double up, to make even, chopping stuff even easier. Obviously with the Langmesser, this would be used for hooking and balance and all that kind of stuff, but honestly with this, I don't really see it. So yes, clearly it's Austrian, so clearly inspired by hunting swords, which themselves came out of Langmessers which went before it. Looks like a sword, but is clearly more of a tool. So, to conclude, absolutely there are obviously loads of weapons in the world which, while you could use them as a tool, would make an absolutely rubbish tool and wouldn't really survive the task because they're made too light and too thin with too fragile edges in terms of the edge geometry to really stand up to long use as a tool. So these aren't designed to be used as tools. You could use them like a machete for clearing light brush, and they'd probably stand up fine for that, but for the most part they're made as weapons, okay, and they have design for that purpose. There are some things which are definitely primarily tools. Most axes are made primarily as tools, and obviously things like kitchen knives and hammers and things like this are made primarily as tools. Can they be used as weapons? Of course. Anything can be used as a weapon if you're imaginative enough. But finally, there is this very distinct category of things which are very clearly, visually designed to be weapons, but as soon as you hold them, they are also designed to be tools. And these things, I think, often get overlooked. And actually, statistically, certainly in the last couple of centuries, this category of weapon, and I would include modern bayonets in this as well, are kind of the most important category, because in a late 19th or 20th or 21st century war context, bayonets that you can open tin cans with, very useful. Bayonets that you can cut barbed wire with, very useful. You know, entrenching tools that you can dig with, very, very useful. Things that you can chop down small saplings and chop up wood for the fire with, really useful. Things that you can prepare meat with, very useful. So these weapons that are also tools are actually really, really important in 19th, 20th and 21st century warfare, and we should give them their due credit. Anyway, thanks a lot for watching. I have been Matt Easton. I hope we see you back on the channel really soon. Cheers, folks. Thanks for watching. We've got extra videos on Patreon. Please give our Facebook a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Cheers, folks.